The ACEC Research Institute recently released the groundbreaking 2020 Engineering Industry Profile. Now, this study provides the most comprehensive view we have ever seen for the entire engineering, architectural, and related services sectors. We're talking 3% of all U.S. jobs, $386 billion in revenue, nearly $45 billion in tax dollars, and $88,000 a year average salary, and so much more. The study also benchmarks state-level activities. Now take the opportunity to download your free copy today. Get the 2020 Engineering Industry Profile by visiting acecresearchinstitute.org. Download your copy today. Welcome to Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. Now, we focus a lot of our shows on the business aspects of engineering, and that's our main focus after all. But we should also spend time talking about the softer side of the profession, because the bridges, buildings, water systems, and related infrastructure our member firms design take up residence in the built environment. People come in contact with it every day, and it defines our world. So, how do we keep our inspiration when we're working on these projects? How do we keep sight of the big picture? And how do we design for the experience of the end user? Because how we design is just as important as what we design. And there's a lot to discuss. And I wanted to get someone onto the show with unique experience and perspective. We kind of exceeded our expectations here. And it's my distinct pleasure to welcome Eddie Sotto. Eddie is the owner of experiential design firm SottoSudios, LA, and served as the Senior Vice President of Concept Design at Walt Disney Imagineering, where he was responsible for the show design for Disneyland Paris's Main Street and the Disneyland Hotel, as well as the master plan for Tokyo Disneyland. Other notable projects on Eddie's resume include the Indiana Jones Adventure at Disneyland USA, Mission Space at Epcot, Pooh's Honey Hunt at Tokyo Disneyland, which I believe was one of the first trackless attractions at Disney Resort. Beyond theme parks, Mr. Soto applied the principle of Imagineering to such projects as the Media as Architecture facade at ABC's Times Square Studios, and has worked on projects for companies as diverse as Motorola, Kodak, Ferrari, and even NASA. So, Eddie, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This is exciting.
Yeah, this is great because it's a great opportunity to marry experiential design and the more creative aspect to the professional aspect of or the more technical aspect of engineering. And right off, for our audience who unlike me, I'm very well versed in Disney history, and I love Disney. For our audience who might not be aware of what Imagineering does and how expansive their portfolio is, can you tell us how you got involved with Disney and what got you into the door?
Well, of course, as a kid, I was always very fascinated by the escape of Disneyland, the experience of going through the portal and being immersed in another world. So you could say, I'm a victim, I'm a customer of experience design. I became addicted to that. And I remember as a young boy saying, when I grow up, I want to be one of those guys that thinks of ideas for rides at Disneyland. And, be careful what you wish for, I suppose. But it wasn't a direct route. I went. There really was no college education, no classes, no internet or anything at the time. This is like 1977 or 8, to really become a theme park designer. If you could imagine no engineering courses and you become an engineer, what do? Go out and watch them make bridges? So that's the way the theme park business was. Other people were just sort of already there. Maybe they were art students or engineers or other things. So I realized that, Disney is a tough place to get into. Imagineering was kind of the pinnacle. I had no real education. So I actually started by pitching ideas to Knott's Berry Farm. I got married very young. I was hired in as my 21 years old to design and kind of create a ride that had engineering problems, believe it or not. It was a ride that existed. It was called the cycle chase, where people were on full-size motorcycles, very high center of gravity. You could imagine that. And they were getting injured. And my boss at Knott's Berry Farm, I pitched my way into a design job, said, of course, they didn't want to build the ride I presented after all. So I was a little worried about keeping my job. And they said, well, what could you do with this? Could you save this other ride? Because we're going to get sued like crazy. People are falling off these motorcycles. So I went out and looked at it, and I learned that clients and any project is always looking for a solution. Design is solutions, and said, well, what if we lowered the center of gravity? And the theme of the area was the 1920s, and said, what if we could make something that reminded you of the soapbox derby,
Mhm.
like those little Our Gang comedy films we would see on TV, with Spanky and so forth, and lowered it like a bobsled. And then, of course, with a height requirement being lower for the guest, that means a complete family audience could ride it. So, what if you could double the ridership, lower the center of gravity, and pretty much have a new ride by, adding some scenery and replacing the vehicles? So, at 21 years old with no college education and no art school or anything, I'm out there with a sketch pad, drawing this ride and building it within 6 months. And this is where I learned collaboration, working with
Mhm.
engineers, people that build vehicles, set designers. And you just kind of learned it by osmosis. And those skills eventually took me to another company called Landmark, working for Six Flags and Universal and those companies. And then Disney hires me away only 4 years later to be probably one of the younger executives to come in at a high level, sort of like as a producer, designer, to do the Main Street for Disneyland Paris. So uh, it was, believing in yourself, pitching ideas, understanding some story, and kind of the hard way, really learning about collaboration.
Yeah, and that you raise a really good point because Imagineers, designers, experiential designers, I mean, you're storytellers, or you want to get a narrative across. If it's an attraction at Disney, it's taking a very abstract concept that either is um, uh, you know birthed in animation, which you have limitless ability to do whatever you want, or cinema, and turning it into something tangible, something immersive, where the guest can experience it beyond just getting on a ride, but almost entering that world. And up against that, you have the engineering perspective, which is taking this concept and turning it into reality, and working the science and the math to make it work. And that's where the technical problem solving skill comes in. And there is a relatively recent example of this. Animal Kingdom, Pandora, which is a newly opened land within Animal Kingdom. Joe Rohde, a now recently retired Imagineer, he drove the concept of these floating mountains. But at the end of the day, it was an ACEC member firm, Walter P. Moore and Associates, that actually did the structural work. And that kind of shows the need for collaboration. Um, I mean, how, in your experience with Disney and the work that you did, I mean, how did you converse and get along with whoever was brought on, either within Imagineering or as a contractor, to actually turn the concept into something tangible?
Well, the name Imagineering comes from imagination being combined with technical know-how, engineering. So Imagineering is imagination and engineering coming together. And so, normally, like for example, we'll just take the Pooh's Honey Hunt attraction, which is sort of the first trackless free ranging ride where the vehicles
Mhm.
have a mind of their own and go different places and do different things. And now it's become the gold standard. 20 years later, it's probably the most prevalent new system to use, if you're going to do something like a show attraction. And so, back at that time, though, there were wire guided systems. There were some things, a wire in the floor could guide a vehicle. You could sense that and so forth. But I had this concept of wanting to do an indoor, a dark ride using this kind of a system, and really let the vehicles, each one be addressed individually. Universe at Energy, at Epcot had a wire in the floor, but it just led grandstands around. It didn't really, it couldn't go backwards. It couldn't do this. It couldn't do that. This is a real template for dark rides. So you need engineers for that. And so we had the ride group, or the ride design group of engineers. And to me, the whole key to this, because it could become very defensive, and engineers, I mean, I'm not signing the drawings, they are. So if somebody gets killed, the engineer is the one who's really signed up for it.
Mhm.
And, I take that seriously too. But, hey, it's their name signing on in the title block, right? So what I try to do because anyway, the culture of signing in the title block like that kind of creates a world of no. And it kind of creates the idea that, well, engineers can have the reputation of over engineering something to be on the safe side, or the super, super, super safe side. And then you miss the intent of the story or of what
Hmm.
the whole project is there for. And a bridge, that is what you're supposed to do. You are supposed to over engineer it and make this thing last for centuries, like the Brooklyn Bridge. A theme park ride, yes, it does have to function, but the success of the business, of the creative aspect, is having the engineering do what the story is asking it to do. So this becomes a very interesting thing of shared trust and response.
Hmm.
I'm not going to ask them to do something that's going to ever endanger a guest or put somebody in jeopardy, of course, where safety is the first priority. But I am asking for a little bit of wackiness. I'm asking for out of the box engineering thinking, which means if you can't do it the way that we've always done it and just make the steel fatter, we're going to go open up a research book and look at different ways of doing something or
Hmm.
different ways of this. So I'll give you an example. Um, we had a model in the open house of this Winnie the Pooh ride, and I asked one of the other designers because the families were coming in. I said, "Ask the kids what scene they like the most in this ride, because you're always asked to cut something.
Yeah.
Everyone's
Yeah.
going to cut something." So I
Hmm.
said, "Well, what scene?" And of course, the one where you bounce with Tigger was the most popular scene. And I knew right then, as a creative guy, I can't cut that scene. That better be, if there's going to be one scene that works. So frankly, I went and cut a lot of stuff out of the line where you're waiting, kind of lowered people's expectations. And then we went back to our staff. We got a bunch of guys in a room. And one of the things with engineers, I try to be the guy that makes the Kool-Aid. I try to make the
Yeah.
excitement and get them excited that it is their job to be the key in making the thing magical. Because if you think of the effects in these rides, that is, if they don't work, there is no show.
Hmm.
And I say,
Exactly.
listen, you guys, I'm waltzing in here with an idea, but it's going to be all of us, and namely you, that you're going to have to be stretch yourself too. And we're all going to sit here. And if it's a success, it's everyone's success, not just
Yeah.
my success. It's not the creative versus the technical. It's the creative and the technical. And you're going to challenge me. And I want you to look at me and say, well, Eddie, bouncing with Tigger is one thing, but what if you could even do this with Tigger too? I'm expecting somebody, when it passes through their hands, to come out better than it was when it went in.
Hmm.
So we go in there and everyone's looking, and of course you start out with sort of the expected. Everyone said, well, you really can't make a vehicle jump up and down with a Tigger. We can't, the impact's going to be too great. It's going to cost too much. Tigger in the movie is jumping 3 feet. We can't really do that. Then comes in the wacky engineer, and he's actually a model builder. He's not even an engineer.
Hmm.
The model builder says, Eddie, here's what we're going to do. I see. That's why I love these meetings. This is what makes, if I was an engineer, and I am a part-time engineer, because I kind of think of the strategy. I don't know how to do it,
Yeah.
but I'm like, well, what if you tried using, this method or that method? So anyway, this one gentleman comes in. I think his name was Ovid Pope. I think that was his name. Anyway, so he comes in, this model guy, Billy, making a model, and he goes, I took it upon myself to make a little paper model for you. I go, come on, show us. So he does. And it's all the scenery in cutouts of like trees in a forest where Tigger is projected into this forest. The scenery is jumping up and down.
Hmm.
He says, I heard in the last meeting, the engineers were crying about, you really can't make the vehicle go up and down that high, that velocity. He says, so what if we only made the vehicle go up and down maybe an inch or so? And we gave the sensation of movement, but the scenery went up and down exactly in sync with it. And then the film of Tigger jumping up and down was also working at a counter perspective to the scenery. And he had this thing all done with sticks and wood and paper. And he starts demonstrating with a little stick and the Tigger and everything. And everybody looks at this and goes, oh my goodness. So it takes lots of different disciplines, the model maker, making the scenery, the engineers. But see, isn't that exciting
Hmm.
when uh, when it takes several talents to come up with a solution? That's what makes it different.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we talk about, and it's been kind of a continuous theme throughout a lot of our conversations, and we talk about the future of engineering, it's that a lot of people who are looking back and saying, okay, where are we going with this? And where's engineering going in 10, 15, 20 years? There's been this acceptance and even a push that just having the technical know-how is not going to be enough, that it's important to also have a backing education in philosophy or the arts or music or literature, so that there's this humanities basis that counterbalances the technical proficiency
Mm,
and allows that
mm,
creative thinking, so that if you do get a group of people together in a room, and also diversifying the experiences and the backgrounds of the engineers
right.
who are around the table,
Well,
you
what
have
I
them
do in
service.
absence of that is, and by the way, it's not to say that you would stereotype engineers as saying, well, they only know engineering. So
Mhm.
I wanted to do a ride for Tokyo Disneyland that involved what would look like rocket powered motorcycles that would do wheelies. I used to have a Schwinn Stingray bicycle,
Mhm.
an orange crate or apple crate or some one of those that had wheelie bars on it. And of course, being a muscle car person myself, anything with drag racing and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff is appealing. So we go in and I want to do the simulated motorcycle ride, but there were certain things I wanted. I didn't want to see the track. I
Mhm.
didn't want this. I didn't want that. So we're in there just talking. And you go around the table and you mine people's personal interests. You say, well, who of you is into racing? Who had a muscle car? I don't start talking about the ride. It's kind of an interview. And you got 8 guys around a table. You have some women there, different ones. And everybody talks about their personal interests. And in my mind, I'm casting because I really want someone to stay till midnight and figure this out. I know I can't do it. And so we ended up, the one person that was the most passionate tells me his father had a rocket powered salt racing car. And that as a kid, he grew up doing that. And I'm like, now I know who I'm putting in charge of the engineering group is the guy that had the rocket powered thing,
Yeah.
because we can leverage their personal interests, whatever that is. And I feel like if you look at Mark Davis, the person that did, I saw the
Mhm.
Tiki Room poster on your
Yeah.
wall. Well, Mark Davis loved, the tribes of New Guinea, and he was very interested in island culture and things like that. Now, Walt Disney was a perfect casting director of looking to these people, and he would pick like Bob Gurr, who's kind of a
Mhm.
seat of the pants engineer who really extended himself in places he had no business, kind of a
Yeah.
hot rodder that's building a monorail,
And
using an
yeah.
electrical department out of the studio where the wiring's burning up in the train with the vice president. I mean,
And for our audience, I mean, Bob Gurr, in Disneyland, if it moves, good chance Bob Gurr designed it, to an extent. The
right.
Autopia, monorail, you know,
Well, Omnimovers, he took Norman Bell
Omnimover.
Geddes
Mhm.
moving World's Fair vehicles and upped the game into a ride of where the engineering helped you watch the show. Omnimover is a chain of vehicles that work very high capacity, like a pod, but the pod is aimed only when you want it in real time at the scene you want someone to look at, like cutting a movie.
Mhm.
So the Omnimover is like an editing tool. It used to be if you're in a train or in a boat, people can look any way they want. Well, that doesn't allow a designer to focus your attention. The Omnimover could focus your attention. It was started at the World's Fair in 1939 by a designer named Norman Bell Geddes, but Gurr made it something that was far more commandable. But that's another good example of an engineer just kind of exploring the boundaries of where they're capable. And look at me. I mean, I use movie set designers as my education, and I ended up where I'm at. I mean, so I feel like,
Mhm.
taking your personal passions too and building that in is a good thing.
Absolutely. I do have to ask about Disneyland Paris, though, because it's hard to explain. Usually, if you go to a Disney park, the first thing, the establishing shot of the park is the train station. It's the classic opening shot in Florida, in California, in most of the parks. But in Disneyland Paris, it's different, because the first thing you see is the Disneyland Hotel, which sits right in front of the turnstile. And I know that you were really led that idea. You kind of had the idea of pitching that to Eisner and to everyone else at Disney, saying, "Why don't we put a hotel here?" And what was the inspiration for that? How did that come about?
Well, I would love to tell you it was some brilliant thing that, you think of on the way to work, but what happened was, because the adverse weather, we had to kind of show ways of covering people from the rain.
Hmm.
And of course, before online ticketing and things, you calculate the operations people said, well, you're going to have like, a mile long line in front of every ticket booth to buy tickets in the morning and so forth. So they gave me a footprint of how much roofing you would have to put over those ticket booths. So I drew this big roof, and to make it look pretty, I kind of followed the Hotel del Coronado Grand Floridian look of roofs. But because there was so much roof there, it needed some sort of an iconic thing. It can't just be a big, ugly roof, because there goes your establishing shot, like you said.
Hmm.
So we did a drawing, and I only put one or two floors on it. It was like, a series of suites, and then pitched the idea. So, well, why don't Michael Eisner said, we're never going to just spend all that money on a roof. I said, well, what if it paid for itself? What if it was like a hotel with one or two floors to it max, and people could look into the park, and it would be kind of an extension of Main Street, like a trolley resort is like Coney Island has hotels, and the railroad takes you out there to, an amusement park. Similar paradigm for that. And he thought that was a good idea. Marty Sklar said, well, what about the Grand Hotel in Mackinac Island? But because immediately, the greed light goes on and people go, let's make it 40 stories, 50
Yeah.
stories. It turns
Hmm.
into this monster, which
Hmm.
I did not want. I never wanted the hotel to be that big.
Yeah.
Someone on Twitter tweeted a picture of Fontainebleau, the big chateau, and said, Eddie, is this big? Did you do gardens in a chateau? Because that whole region, Loire Valley, has chateaus and gardens, and that it's a very French thing to do, is to approach the chateau of Disney. I wish I would have thought of that, because then I could have justified it that way. It would have sounded
Mhm.
like French culture. Um, but no, it was a bunch of happy accidents, and it was all I could do to get the scale of the windows down. So from Main Street, it didn't look, terribly
Yeah.
monolithic back there, but it worked out, I guess.
No, it's beautiful, and it's convenient. It's November in Paris. It's not exactly the time to be outside a lot, so having that cover and convenience was very good. And you know uh, kind of a follow up to that, I do want to ask about the Main Street, because that is always the most recognizable aspect to a park. I would say that a Disney park is the Main Street, but France had its own challenges because French culture, your high speed train is 10-minute ride from essentially beautiful grand avenues of Paris, and then you're tasked with creating a typical kind of turn of the century idealized American Main Street, so close to Parisian culture and French culture. How did you approach that so it could satisfy and be accepted by that audience that was being drawn to the park?
Well, I mean, we didn't. I mean, the very first week I was there, I was thinking to myself, who is this for? Who is my audience? And, if America is known by Europeans through its films predominantly, and a few tourist attractions like San Francisco or Santa Fe, New Mexico, or New York, those are like the top three. How do you make people feel this? Because if you really look at the DNA of this, the DNA is Walt Disney
Mhm.
is basically handing down small town America, the innocence of small town America, to a new American audience. And Europeans, it just looks like another cute village. And if you've ripped off all their architecture
Yeah.
and put it in a blender, and that's American Victorian, and it is different. American Victorian is different. It's not enough different. And will they get it? Does it going to be a Disney mall or a story? So the first thing we did was, Tony Baxter, who was my boss, who's a kind of a Disney legend.
Hmm.
We sat down and said, well, what if we turn the clock forward just enough to be recognizable? And that's when you get American jazz, you get things that are uniquely American. And maybe we do something that's a little bit more like the film Some Like It Hot, where you have the 1920s, where it's exciting. It's not about the horse-drawn streetcars and cobblestones, of Main Street, because every European village looks like that. I mean, they're
Hmm.
like, well, yeah,
Yeah.
I came from a European village to come here, and this is not as cute as my European village. So how do you do that, And also make the architecture read. So
Mhm.
we started with this 1920s design, but I kind of, just out of boredom, didn't want to build a Main Street myself. I don't want to be at a photocopier building Walt Disney World's Main Street. That's not what I went there for. So we kind of turned it into a land. I mean, it was very
Mhm.
expensive, had an elevated train system in it. It was really cool.
Yeah.
So cool. It was so expensive, and I think Michael Eisner was a little uncomfortable with straying from the Disney formula. So yeah, we lost it and
Yeah.
went back to the main street. But I wasn't going to give up. We still put tons of story, and I did notice living there. Europeans take their kids to museums on weekend, maybe because
Hmm.
there's not other theme parks, but predominantly, and Europeans like to feel good
Hmm.
culturally about something. They like depth. They're used to depth. They grew up in those layers of history and depth. So I thought, well, we're going to make Main Street. I had come from Knott's Berry Farm. There was a lot of history at Knott's. Let's let's make this a living museum. Let's make this Main Street a very cultural, not politically American, but culturally American, with American artists, American illustrators. Even the wallpaper will be an American wallpaper design. The lamps, we're going to buy them in the US. They'll be real antiques. This is going to be something, if you're a French interior designer, you're going to walk in and go, wow, this is a textbook of a fun, romanticized, kind of like a musical, or like Hello Dolly is a musical, is going to be the Hello Dolly version of American
Hmm.
Victorian, something that Europeans will feel very reassured about, but yet it also has history. It has
Yeah.
depth.
And
It's
this,
not just a Disney plush mall.
yeah, and the design took into consideration the weather. You have the covered arcades that
Yeah, we do.
that go on the side of the main street, and like you said, and it's hard for to visualize this if you haven't been there. But you go in and you're immediately presented with a story and a narrative that carries you through Main Street, especially in the arcades, where you even have a small little pocket where you can go and see kind of a vignette of coming to America and Ellis Island and that experience. Then you have actual, like you said, American antiques, some patented objects from the time period that are there, and it is all works with the narrative, and it's more deep than it has significantly more depth than your normal Main Street, which is getting you into the park and you know
Yeah, and I don't even know, Jeff, if that level of detail would be that interesting in America.
yeah.
People are just walk right by it. In Europe, I heard the first year I was still on the project at the time. I asked the operations person, like, who was running the whole park. I said, what's the deal with Main Street? He goes, people are actually spending 2 hours in Main Street before they go into the other lands.
Hmm.
They love to read all the plaques, and because each arcade leads to another story. And I think this is one important thing to think about, is in the story thing, is what happens in the context of whatever it is you're designing.
Hmm.
And all, and the details are sensory. Everything matters. So if you're engineering a roller coaster and it's too noisy, that's going to get in the way of the soundtrack on the roller coaster. We have to think holistically. We have to think in sensory way. Well, I have to do that with story. So one arcade leads to Frontierland, the Old West. Well, that was about liberty, and liberty is about the kind of conquest of the West. So it prepares you mentally for the next land. The other arcade led to Jules Verne and science
Hmm.
fiction and all this. So we put in the Jules Vernean world
Yeah.
leading up to Discovery Land, of how people thought the future would be,
Yeah,
because
that
that's the
alternative
futuristic
future.
land.
Yeah, that
Right.
like America, New York in 2020 with that kind of turn of the
Yeah.
century feel. Um,
Exactly.
yeah.
So context is always important, but as an experienced designer, I find that you can engineer or design for one thing, but it sets off or wrecks the experience in the other. So you want to think about, okay, what does it smell like? What does it sound like? A matter of fact, Mission Space,
Hmm.
we were going to do it with a roller coaster to create G forces instead of a centrifuge. And we quickly learned that I didn't have enough confidence that we could engineer out the vibrations and imperfections of the harmonics of track into the vehicle. So people would,
Hmm.
no matter what you did, you'd still feel like you were moving in a forward direction. You could never quite get that out. So I thought, you know what? This is just too hard. I also don't think it's fair to ask engineers to do things that are, beyond the laws of physics
Hmm.
either, unless we could simulate it in some other way. So I'd rather find a way for everyone to win and say, well, look, we can do this with G forces. We can mock this up. And, there's
Yeah,
different approaches.
absolutely. I guess tying it back to that idea of, like you said, every detail matters, and I think that is critically important because I would imagine that when you're designing for an experience, an immersion, um, it doesn't take much for somebody to be knocked out of the story. And
No,
that ties in with engineering a little bit because you're building, so you're designing something, and at the end of the day, the end user is going to interact with that, and what you design is going to define a piece of the built environment that they interact with on a daily basis. And even though you might be designing one piece of a larger system, that one piece that you're focused on is always going to be critical because that detail only adds to the success of the system. So,
it's totally true. Experiences are systems. They're sensory systems. You create an expectation, and then you need to kind of be able to fire on all cylinders, in that system. So that's why the audio guy is important. Speaker placement is important, but yet visuals are there. And if it's out of whack, and like I look at myself as an orchestra conductor, and I've got all these different disciplines that are there. There's lighting, there's this, there's that, there's all these various things. And Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, I remember they replaced the track. Well, they perfected the track. And so I asked Tony, I said, well, what do you think of the new track and how it is? He goes, isn't it the same? He goes, no, they took and now they have computers to do it. It's
yeah.
so perfect. The thing feels like glass. It doesn't feel like
Mhm.
an old train. Part of the threat of the ride, like a wood roller coaster versus an iron coaster, the vehicle in kind of goes in flight. It does little mini airs within the
Mhm.
tolerance of the rail. So you always feel this vibration, which creates a precarious anxiety in the guest. So, when you do these things, like you need to think about all the side effects of what it is you're designing and engineering and building, even the way the seats are
Mhm.
done, and operations will say, well, cram more people in, make the seats more vertical. And you say, well, yeah, but then they wouldn't be able to see the scenery. I'll
Absolutely.
give you a good story, like Rise of the Resistance, the new
Yeah.
Star Wars ride uses free ranging vehicles in it. But because of COVID, they put these big plastic clear partitions in to
Mhm.
create distancing. The problem is all the show lighting, which is designed at, various angles in the ceiling, reflects off of those panels. So now you can't see the show. Now it's almost like a half mirror seeing all the stuff that everyone works so hard for you not to see. So these little things can completely destroy the experience. Like the Ratatouille ride in Paris is a
Mhm.
3D movie in certain scenes, but the vehicle never quite gets close enough to crop off the bottom of the screen. So you're always conscious you're watching a movie in 3 out of the 5 scenes. So you're no longer in it. There's no
Mhm.
reason to be in it. If the vehicle was only a foot closer, it's magic.
I
So
noticed
all
that.
these things
I
are
actually, yeah.
fragile. I guess that's my point.
Yeah, no, it's a good point.
Experiences are fragile.
Absolutely. No, it's a really good point. Now I'm going to be interested. I'm heading down in March to Florida, and now with all the scripts, so it's going to be interesting to see how the experience differs with all the plexiglass dividers. And I understand why they're doing it; they have to do it. But how that's going to affect show is going to be
It's
interesting.
a magic killer.
Yeah. Well, I do want to go into a little bit of what you're working on now. A lot of design work I know that you've done with, for our audience, the background of Eddie's screen right now is an aircraft interior, which his firm designed, which was award winning. I believe you won an award for that. And you've also been doing some design for automotive and I believe some nautical design as well. What else are you looking at doing, or what do you have on the front burner?
On the front burner, we do have a lot of things in development. We have a concept that we're putting together to revive malls. I'm very concerned about malls. My number one concern is that all the work we've talked about, fragile experiences and engineering, and all the sweat and hours and risk and everything else everyone's put in, I think is being destroyed by making theme parks, stadiums, any shared experience you go with your family into a hospital. I mean, theme parks are basically outpatient, psychological outpatient for people
Mhm.
because they can't take the world they're in. When we go there, you need these escapes. They're more valuable than you think. Emotional and shared experiences. So I put together a small hit team. I thought, it's we're shooting too low to say let's make cute masks and sell them. Sure, to function you need masks. I'm not getting into the mask, no mask thing.
Mhm.
But what I am saying is that if we can create a safe bubble and use technology to create a main gate experience where once you go through, you do not need a mask, not because we don't care about you, but because it's so safe, like going through TSA at the airport. If it was more like an airport where people, I can relax. I'm
Yeah.
not wary of you. I mean, psychologically, when you're looking at other people and saying, "Hey, you're too close to me, man.
Mhm.
Get away. I don't, you just sneezed. Let's go shoot that person because they sneezed." And we can't have a world like that. That's what shared experiences are about, is where everyone can get along and it's a small world after all. So
Mhm.
I put together a small group of very smart people. Some of them are engineers, they're doctors, they're physicists, computer engineers, and said, okay, the idea is this: Eddie wants a main gate that when you go through, it has to be almost instant result. It has to be over 95% bulletproof accuracy, asymptomatic. Forget it. It doesn't matter what stage you're in. If you have it, it knows. And preferably, it has to be operational feasible, that
Mhm.
it's not chemically based. You can't have
Mhm.
nurses running around, and it's also seamless for the guest. They
Yeah.
just walk up, they hardly even know. But I want to make it fun. Give me something I can make fun. So we did some research, and I don't know, there's more than one company working on this, but our favorite method, I'll just say, is um, terahertz sensed breathalyzer, meaning you use a terahertz microscopy, I guess,
Mhm.
to a terahertz scanner to scan someone's breath and read the harmonics of the virus. And by the way, it
Mhm.
can be tuned like a radio to sense variants or other viruses, not just COVID. So it's future proofing for people.
Mhm.
But within 60 seconds, the result is out of machine learning. So the machine only gets smarter. This
Yeah.
is not where you go, oh, we just bought this and now we have to go have doctors start over finding another, vaccine. No. So suddenly the controversy of whether you're vaccinated or not, all those things go away. And literally you blow into a duck call, kind of like a little breathalyzer. Each individual does that. They get their own. It's disposable, whatever. Maybe on a screen, it's put into a machine by a cast member. So
Mhm.
a minimum wage person can run this. And while your bags are being looked at, Jeff doesn't even know it. His family's doing his bags. We don't even talk to you unless you're the sick one.
Yeah.
So over 95% of the people are going to probably not be sick at all.
Mhm.
So imagine how you could change the world and get people's jobs back, go back
No,
to full
absolutely.
capacity. So we are testing this here in the USA, and we're testing it in Europe, I believe, right now. So there's testing going on. I've been on Fox Business talking about it, and we have to get the FDA. We got to go through. I'm not happy with this until it's proven, just like you are with
Mhm.
any. You know, it's not a bridge till it's a bridge.
Absolutely. So that your target is, and understandably so, large retail areas where people get aggregate as a
Airports,
in
folks.
airports. Yeah,
Yeah.
because that's
Um,
something that's, I
it's
mean,
also portable. Jeff, it's portable. This thing is small enough to be a rack you know, uh, in a hotel lobby or
mhm.
in your private. We're talking about one for private jets, where if you flew to a foreign country that didn't
Yeah.
have, you were changing crews. What if they could be tested in a minute?
Mhm.
Very low cost test, and then get in the plane.
And
Boom, on. I
an
mean,
interesting thing.
this is game changing. I
Yeah.
don't want to do any masks, and I'm not here to design the next shield and ruin a ride.
Mhm.
I worked too hard on it. So did a lot of other people. Does any artist at a concert. They deserve the crowd. So do the Lakers. So does anyone. You know,
Yeah.
don't you want to root for your home team? Don't you want what your dad gave you of going to the game?
Absolutely.
You really want to be,
Yeah.
yeah, come
I mean,
on.
that's the thing. Because I mean, a
Or
lot of our firms are engaged in this to an extent because they're doing a lot of the machine learning, the AI that goes into helping, let's say, municipalities potentially gauge, concentrations of virus through, wastewater streams and things like that. But they're also looking forward and saying, okay, what's the building going to look like? What's the next office?
right.
If we're in the process of designing an office building, what's it going to look like, and how are people going to interact?
Exactly.
And solutions like this are important because they play a role in how the design flows to what's
Right.
required by the people who work in there and demanded by the employees.
Exactly. And I'm sure your audience would have a lot of questions. So
Mhm.
I've put it, I created a studio as one of our studios with just these individuals in it, and it's called Futureproof Experiences.com. If you go to Futureproof Experiences, I'm sure all one word,
Mhm.
.com, you can see there's what we're doing, the technologies we've adopted that are in testing, where we are with this. We also do agent-based simulation of venues. So we can show you mask or unmasked. We can show you lots of various things to help clients figure out really what is the best solution for them. So what Soto Studios has done, and the company we're working with is called Ram Global,
Mhm.
that builds the core technology. We want a rapid experience around it. So we're the official experience designers
Mhm.
to create the desk at the elegant hotel, or to
Yeah.
create the airport experience or the stadium experience where the mascot is going, come on, let's see you, blow that
Mhm.
noisemaker,
Yeah.
baby, and then you do, and the kids
Exactly.
are like, let's do that again. That was so fun.
Mhm.
I wouldn't dream of an experience without it.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
we want to get you to forget about the germs and just have the fun again.
Yeah, and that's that. I think we all want to be there,
We all
and
want to, yeah.
we'll make sure to put that link into the show notes as well. For any of our firms out there who are embarking on large projects, or even just want a little bit more of a idea into design, how do they get in touch with you at Soto Studios?
Well, you could email, we have an information box, info at
Hmm.
Soto Studios. And of course, you know, imagine an engineering firm that collaborates with a creative firm to land a contract.
Hmm.
I mean, I have engineering firms call me, elevator firms, vehicle firms saying, Eddie, if we can package your experience design in with our engineering, we'll have a competitive leg against the other people that we're going up against.
Yeah,
So, like when Calatrava steps in the door and you're doing a bridge, everybody
hmm,
listens. Well, I'd
absolutely.
love to be your Calatrava or your design entity for some of your firms or things that are there. I'm not, I deliberately started doing other things beyond theme parks, but it's always about a really positive customer experience and reimagining things. So
Yeah,
sotostudios.com, info at Soto Studios. Our airplane page, if you want to go see that, is Soto Luxury, which has some really cool
that's a
renderings and imagery for that.
yeah, it's
So
beautiful stuff. If I could only
thanks. Thanks.
aspire to own something like that
Well,
one
it's
day.
funny. People call me and they go, I'm about to come into a lot of money, and I'm like, well, good, good. When's that going to happen? Well, I just want you to know, I've chosen the Sky Yacht One. That's what I want. Every other plane is boring compared to what you're doing. And I said, well, you could put it in any, we could do something just for you. It depends.
Hmm.
So,
Absolutely.
um, it's fun.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate your time and just
Sure.
the experience and what you bring to the conversation. It's great. And thank you also for contributing so much to, a lot of people's experiences. And like you said, it's an escape. It's a place where people can go and kind of put the world in a box and just experience something different. And for people like you and your fellow designers who can create something tangible out of fantasy, it makes the world a little bit better of a place to live in. So thank you for that.
Well, if I might just thank you, and I might just add that everybody, every waiter in Hollywood has a screenwriter, screenplay in his pocket, right?
Mhm.
Everybody has ideas, but it takes a unique blend of can-do attitude, and that's to me the whole thing, with the right team.
Mhm.
And these things are team efforts. And of course, I'm selling Sato Studios and my approach to these things. But
Yeah.
what I also sell is the packaging of the very finest talent.
Mhm.
And, you know, creative engineers inspire me. I mean, I have just as much fun around that table as anybody else. And we're all friends. We all get
Mhm.
along, and they say, hey, look at this kind of cool thing I'm gonna do. And I have to say, excitement is contagious you
Yeah.
know,
Absolutely.
and it could be a rocket powered cocktail shaker. Who knows? It could be whatever. We actually did one of those ones.
Ah.
It only looked like the Rocketeer's backpack. But anyway. Anyway,
Well,
thanks so much, Jeff, for the opportunity
thank
to
you.
meet your very talented audience. And, that's why they call it Imagineering, right?
Exactly. Well, thank you again, Eddie. And this has been another episode of Engineering Influence podcast brought to you by the American Council of Engineering Companies. Until next time, stay safe, and we will see you next time.